Well, we frozen Presbyterians are not very good about expressing our feelings. And we're not alone. In general, it is no longer very acceptable in American society to spend a lot of time outside of the funeral service expressing grief. We simply expect people to get over it and get on with it. Or at least to have the decency to weep in the privacy of their own homes. We are generally uncomfortable with outward expressions of sad feelings. It's no surprise to me that the phrase that got the Brits through the bombing of London in World War II should be making such a powerful comeback. The saying is emblazoned on t-shirts and mugs and bumper stickers and Facebook posts. It simply says, "Stay calm and carry on." And yet, here's Jesus in His extraordinary sermon telling you and me that those who weep now are blessed. In Jesus' day, mourning was almost an art. There were often hired mourners when someone died, not just at the burial, but for hours and days, perhaps a week after the death. Mourning was expected at the display of the corpse and at the funeral. Women sang dirges, men eulogized the dead, they beat their chests and they hit their heads, and everyone stomped their feet and rent their clothes and smeared themselves with ashes. Grief was experienced with the whole being. Even in the early days of this country, the expression of grief had more depth. We know that widows traditionally wore black for months, even up to a year after the death of a husband. Such practices have now largely gone away as we push mourning and crying away and act as if everything is hunky-dory about an hour after the loss. We have lost the compassion that allows us to mourn in public. We want the world to put on a happy face, but Jesus says, "Blessed are you who weep now." Well, biblical scholars think that in addition to acknowledging personal losses and grief, Jesus may also be referring to something bigger here. Please note that Jesus didn't say, "Blessed is the one who weeps." No, Jesus uses the plural. Jesus says, "Blessed are you," plural, "who weep." We Southerners would probably say it better by, "Y'all who are crying, bless your hearts." Jesus wanted to emphasize the sense of community. And when we grieve over the hurts in the world around us, we grieve with others. When you and I see news like we've been watching, tens of thousands dead in the Syrian civil war, riots and death in Lahore, Pakistan, when we hear the news of murders and abuse or of people dying of cancer or AIDS, we grieve for those that we do not even know. Weekly, when we listen and voice our prayer concerns here in this congregation, we can't help but grieve. We can't help but lament and pray with and for our fellow human beings. This community mourning, says scholar Tom Long, grows out of an awareness of the difference between the world as it is and the world as God intends it to be. Long reminds you and me that the commercial on TV some years back, where the camera begins by scanning the typical American landscape, and it's very beautiful. But the camera keeps panning back towards the highway, and as it gets closer and closer, we see trash and litter all along the road, destroying the scenery. And then the camera focuses in on a Native American solemnly looking at the mess, and we see a lone tear streaming from his eye. This is how God must feel, Long says, and how we Christians should feel as we look at the world at times. As we see the spoiling of God's creation and also the deep pains that people suffer. The plain truth about today's beatitude is that if you and I dare to care about, to love creatures and creation, we risk hurting and crying and mourning and feeling. Oftentimes, we avoid caring so that we won't hurt. Again, our society encourages this lack of feeling. Violent movies and video games tend to make us more immune to pain and suffering rather than attuned to it. We're encouraged to go after what makes us feel good rather than allowing ourselves to feel the deep emotions that might hurt. And when we do hurt, we jump quickly to use pills or alcohol or other stimuli to drown out or to lift our spirits. Jesus is telling us that at times it is okay to feel grief and even be able to express it, to cry, to weep. Blessed are you who weep now. But pronouncing blessing on showing a full range of emotions is not Jesus' final word. In the Beatitude, Jesus goes on to promise that those who weep now will laugh, or that those who mourn will be comforted. This comfort comes as Jesus' final word. This comfort comes as an end to tears. Comfort for Christians includes a vision of the salvation that Christ brings with the resurrection and the coming completion of God's kingdom. The greatest comfort for Christians is a future one. Many who suffer in this life do not find comfort until the next life, until the kingdom come. We can think of Jews dying in concentration camps in Germany, or of enslaved African Americans suffering in the early years of this country. Maybe we can even remember family members or friends who never seemed to find comfort in this life, who struggled with drugs or alcohol or psychological demons, who perhaps even died tragically. But the promise of Jesus is that those who weep will laugh. Those who mourn will be comforted. For Christians, this is our gift to humanity. It's the message of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. At the heart of our faith is the mystery of our God who became human in the person of Jesus of Nazareth. And this fully human, fully divine Jesus suffers and mourns and weeps as we do. He knows as deeply as we do the pains of earthly life and the fears of death and dying. And we worship Him because He was brought through all of the pain and mourning and death and was raised from the dead, given resurrection life so that He might walk before God in the light of life. And brothers and sisters, we believe that because Jesus did all this, that this promise is not for Him alone. This promise is for everyone, everywhere. Blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh. You will receive comfort. You will know the fullness of joy of a life lived in the presence of God and in the strength of the community of God. Truth is, you and I all weep. We all grieve at times in our lives for our own losses and for the losses of the world around us. But Jesus wants us to know that there is a time for crying and weeping and mourning, for grieving. For in grieving, you and I show that we care. And in caring, we show that we love. And in loving, we risk feeling hurt. And most blessedly, in loving, you and I live as Christ lived. You and I participate in the life that God intends for all creation. We live in community with one another and with God and all creation. Yes, dear friends, there is much to mourn. Yet the good news for us this morning is that for those who seek to follow Christ and His teaching, we have a sure promise from God. We have the promise that through it all, there is and always will be comfort and a time to laugh. So whatever your pain is today, whatever tears are welled up in your spirit. I pray that as you bring them before God, you will know the healing and the blessing of this marvelous beatitude. The healing and the blessing of a God who never says, "Now buck up, good Christians, don't cry." I pray that you will know the healing of the God who puts His divine arms around you and pulls you close in an intimate hug and says, "Just hold on, my brother, my sister. We're traveling together." Blessed are those who weep now, for you shall laugh. Thanks be to God. Amen.